The courtroom was packed. Murmurs filled the air as Sarah Mitchell entered, handcuffed, her steps heavy, her gaze lost. Her eyes, once full of hope, were now nothing but the reflection of a shattered soul. Across the room, John Reynolds, the relentless prosecutor, crossed his arms, analyzing every detail of the woman as if he already knew the outcome of the story. But what he, and everyone there, didn't know was that this mother was about to reveal something that would change everything. At the top of the courtroom, Judge Richard Holloway adjusted his glasses, watching Sarah attentively. He was not known for being a man of many emotions, but there was something about her. Something that made him hesitate for a second before starting the trial. When Sarah opened her mouth to speak, her voice faltered. She swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and finally the words came out. "Please, Your Honor, everything I did was for the love of my son." The room fell silent. The judge looked directly at her. "And exactly what did you do, Mrs. Mitchell?" Her gaze lifted, shining with a mixture of pain and desperation. "I found him. After 5 years. I finally found my son. But now they say he was never mine." The words cut through the air like a cold blade. The audience murmured, confused. The prosecutor smiled faintly, shuffling through a stack of papers. He already had everything prepared to discredit her. But Sarah wasn't going to stop there. Not after everything she had been through. Because what no one knew was that she had uncovered something much bigger than the disappearance of her son. Something that could land many powerful people behind bars. And if she told the truth, she might never leave that courtroom alive. 5 years. That's what Sarah Mitchell had lost. The memory of when her son, Tyler, disappeared still burned in her mind like an open wound. She woke up every morning, the same nightmare repeating in her head. Tyler's smiling face, the backpack on his back as he left for school. A simple routine, an ordinary morning, until, on that day, he never came home. She looked at Tyler's photo one last time. The pure smile. The messy hair as only children can have. He was so alive in that picture, so present in her life. But then, everything vanished. For weeks, months, she couldn't breathe right. The visits to the police, the posters with Tyler's photo plastered all over the city, the muffled cries at night. Nothing made sense. How could a boy just disappear? How could she, a devoted mother, be left in the dark with no answers? And when the police started treating her like a suspect, the pain went even deeper. But Sarah didn't let herself be defeated. She knew with every fiber of her being that her son was still alive. Something inside her, a mother's instinct, told her that he was out there somewhere. She couldn't wait anymore. She couldn't trust anyone. And that's when her solitary journey began, tracking every clue, every small detail as if her life depended on it. And in a way it did. It was a cold autumn afternoon when finally she received an anonymous photo. Her heart raced. It was an image of a boy, with the same eyes as Tyler. Next to him, a man with a gray goatee and a hardened look. The photo came with a scrawled address, no further explanations. Could it be? Was it Tyler? She looked at the photo and for a moment, everything she knew vanished. The world went silent. She had to act quickly. And that's exactly what she did. With her heart pounding, Sarah drove to the address, her body trembling with fear but also with hope. After everything she had been through, she couldn't afford to fail now. Sarah never imagined that the search for her son would lead her to this place. She arrived at the secluded house, a small cottage at the end of a deserted road, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to hide secrets. The address from the photo had brought her here, but something felt off. The silence was heavy, as if the very air itself was trying to push her away. Still, she didn't hesitate. If that man was really who she thought he was, he had the answers Sarah had been searching for all these years. She knocked on the door. The sound echoed into the emptiness, but no one answered. With her heart racing, Sarah pushed the door, which was ajar, and stepped inside. The smell of mold and old wood invaded her senses. The house was dimly lit, with furniture scattered around and papers thrown everywhere. And then she saw him. The man with the goatee was standing in the corner of the room, watching her with a cold smile on his face. He didn't seem surprised to see her there. In fact, he almost looked like he had been expecting her. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of anger and fear. The man didn't answer immediately. He took a step forward, and his eyes were penetrating, as if he was reading every thought Sarah had. "You shouldn't be here," he finally spoke, his voice deep and threatening. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. But before she could react, a low laugh escaped the man's lips. "You're looking for your son, aren't you?" he said, taking another step toward her. "Where is Tyler? What did you do with him?" Sarah screamed, her voice choked with anger and pain. The man simply smiled. The smile was not that of a normal human being. It was a cold, chilling smile, the smile of someone who had done terrible things. Tyler? He's no longer yours. He was never yours. He stepped closer. He's mine now. The words hit like a bomb. Sarah was frozen. What was he saying? What was happening? And then, something she never expected happened. The man stepped even closer, and in one swift motion, Sarah felt the pressure of a gun against her chest. I don't think you understand yet, he whispered. He belongs to me. And you'll never see him again. Panic overtook Sarah. She was in danger. But the vision of Tyler, the feeling of him being nearby, kept her steady. She knew he was close. She couldn't lose control now. With an instinctive move, Sarah grabbed the lamp next to her and with all her strength struck the man in the head. He staggered back, letting out a grunt of pain, but Sarah didn't have time to breathe. She grabbed Tyler and without thinking ran toward the door. The man was still getting up, but she wasn't stopping. Not after everything she had been through. She had to escape. But just as Sarah passed through the door, something made her stop. The sound of a gunshot echoed into the night. The man had fired, but the shot missed its target. The night was cold and Sarah felt the weight of the run in her legs. She and Tyler had escaped the house, but they hadn't gone far enough. The man with the goatee was still behind them. The sound of a car engine echoed in the distance, and Sarah knew time was running out. With her heart racing, she pulled Tyler through the dark streets, her eyes alert to every movement around them. Every shadow seemed to hide a new danger. She needed to get to the police, she needed to tell them what she had discovered. But something was holding her back. A strange feeling as if she was already too late. As if everything she was doing was part of a game that had already been decided. That's when she heard the sound of a door opening. Sarah turned quickly, fear overtaking her body. In the entrance of a small abandoned building, a familiar figure appeared. Frank Delaney, the lawyer she had thought was her ally all this time. But there he was, with a grim expression, as if he knew Sarah would come to him. Frank, what's going on? Where is my son? Sarah shouted, trying to understand the situation. He looked at her with a sorrowful expression. The friendly smile she remembered was gone, replaced by an empty gaze. Sarah, you don't understand. I did what I could, but you were so blinded by a mother's love that you couldn't see what was happening around you. Frank's voice was low, but it carried something Sarah didn't want to comprehend. She felt her throat tighten. It couldn't be true. You knew where Tyler was all along? Sarah asked, her voice faltering, full of disbelief. Frank took a step back, his eyes briefly diverting as if searching for the right words. Then he spoke. Yes, Sarah. But there was more at stake. It wasn't just about finding your son. There were other interests, much bigger things than you can imagine. Sarah felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. What did he mean by that? What was going on? She was caught in a web of lies and manipulations, and Frank Delaney was at the center of it. That's when she saw it. A small movement in the shadow behind him. The man with the goatee. He appeared at the door, a cruel smile on his lips. Now, Mrs. Mitchell, I think it's time for you to understand the truth. Sarah tried to take a step back, but her feet felt heavy as if gravity had suddenly increased. Fear gripped her body, but she wasn't going to give up. Not now. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew something was terribly wrong with all of this. Frank looked at the man with the goatee, then back at Sarah. You'll have to choose, Sarah. Keep searching for the truth and risk your life, and Tyler's, or accept what we're offering you. The tension was in the air, like a rope about to snap. Sarah looked at Frank and the man with the goatee, her heart beating so loudly that she feared everyone there could hear it. What was going on? What else didn't she know about this story? Frank's voice sounded like a sharp blade, cutting through the tense silence of the night. You have no idea what's happening, do you, Sarah? He took a step forward, his gaze heavy with a guilt she could barely comprehend. This is not just a case of a mother and son. There are much bigger forces at play. Sarah felt her throat tighten, and her instincts warned her of the imminent danger. She couldn't let Frank entangle her in more lies. What do you mean by that? What are they doing to my son? She demanded, the desperation in her voice overflowing. Frank looked at the man with the goatee, and they exchanged a glance. Sarah felt as though she was about to be crushed by something she couldn't even imagine. What was happening there? That's when the man with the goatee took a step forward, a cold smile on his lips. He was enjoying her suffering. It's simple, Sarah. You're in the middle of a game. And in the end, it's not just you who will lose. Sarah felt panic take over her body. She was starting to understand the gravity of the situation. But before she could react, she heard a muffled sound in the air, followed by a gunshot. The sound of the shot exploded in the stillness of the night, and Sarah saw the man with the goatee stagger backward. He looked at the hand holding the gun, bewildered, as if he didn't know what had just happened. That's when she saw the figure that appeared from the shadows, quick as lightning. John Reynolds, the prosecutor who always seemed distant and insensitive, was standing with a gun in his hands. His face was cold, impassive, as if he were the very embodiment of justice. But that shot didn't seem like an impulsive action. It wasn't. John's movement was calculated, meticulous. He had waited for the right moment, and now, everything Sarah thought she knew about this case was being turned upside down. The man with the goatee fell to his knees, the gun slipping from his hands and hitting the floor with a metallic sound. Sarah, stunned, looked at John, not knowing if he was there to help her or if that action was part of an even darker plot. "What did you do?" Sarah asked, her eyes filled with confusion and fear. John didn't answer immediately. He walked over to the fallen man, observing him with an expression of contempt. Then he turned his attention back to Sarah, his eyes now piercing and serious. "I warned you, Sarah. They've been manipulating you all along. Now we need to do this the right way or we'll all end up losing." Sarah was paralyzed. Manipulation? Who was that man? What did he really want from her? Before she could ask more questions, the sound of sirens approaching cut through the air, and the light from a police car illuminated the scene. But for a moment, Sarah had the feeling that the help that was coming wasn't the answer to her problems. She was more entangled than ever, and no one else there seemed to be who they appeared to be. The police finally arrived, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only just beginning. The patrol car lights illuminated the scene with an intensity that made everything seem even darker. The man with the goatee was lying on the ground, but his gaze was still fixed on Sarah, full of hatred and something else, something she couldn't identify. John Reynolds, the prosecutor, seemed too calm for someone who had just fired a gun. He watched the authorities approach, and when a police officer tried to ask questions, he simply raised his hand, as if he were in control of the entire situation. "He'll survive, but the question is, for how long?" John said with a coldness that cut through the air. Sarah, on the other hand, was paralyzed. The last thing she wanted was to see more blood. The man with the goatee, now immobilized, had been a constant threat. But the truth was she didn't know who the real enemy was. "Who is he, John?" Sarah asked, her words coming out low, almost muffled by the tension of the moment. John didn't answer immediately. He looked at the police officers, who were busy trying to control the situation, and then with a sigh he finally spoke. "He's part of something bigger, Sarah. Something you can't understand. This man, he's just the tip of the iceberg. And the truth you're looking for is much deeper than you realize." Sarah felt a cold sensation running through her veins. What did he mean by that? What was so big, so hidden that no one had ever told her? She looked at the fallen man, her eyes full of distrust. It didn't make sense. If he was just a pawn in the game, who was moving the pieces behind all of this? "You need to stay away from this, Sarah," John said, interrupting her thoughts. "There are people out there who will do anything to make sure you don't uncover the truth. And those people, they're much more dangerous than you think." Sarah took a step back. The tension was suffocating, but something inside her told her she couldn't just stop. She wouldn't abandon the search for Tyler, not now. But the feeling of being watched grew with every passing minute. Then she realized she wasn't alone. There was someone else. Someone in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to act. And before she could understand what was happening, a quick movement at the corner of the street caught her attention. A shadow slid behind a car, disappearing into a dark alley. Sarah didn't think twice. She ran toward the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. The enemy was close. And now she was closer to them than ever. With each step, the feeling of being watched intensified. She was being followed and she knew it. But who was the real enemy? Was it John with his mysterious coldness? Or was it someone even darker? She turned the corner, and there in the shadows she found what she hadn't expected. A woman with empty eyes, wearing an enigmatic smile that seemed to understand everything Sarah was thinking. The woman looked at her deeply, as if she knew exactly what she was trying to uncover. "Do you think the truth will set you free, Sarah?" the woman whispered, her voice low but filled with a chilling authority. "You're just starting to realize that the enemy isn't who you think it is." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The enemy had been inside her all along. Sarah was in shock, the words from the file still echoing in her mind. The name that had emerged from the shadows, destroyed everything she thought she knew. But there was something else Sarah didn't understand. Something that connected her in a way she could never have imagined. She looked at John, her mind spinning with the speed of the revelations. The prosecutor was there, silent, but his expression was that of someone carrying a heavy burden. He knew what was about to happen, but at that moment he didn't seem to have the strength to stop it. "Sarah, you have to go to the courthouse," John said, his voice deep. "That's where everything will be resolved. There's the last piece you need to understand all of this." The courthouse was nearly empty when Sarah arrived, but the room was heavy. The only thing left was the pain. The pain of losing everything she believed. The empty chairs around the courtroom seemed to mock her. But the greatest weight was before her, the judge. When she entered, the judge's gaze, the same man who had observed the cases that came before him every day, was fixed on her face. He was visibly upset, his eyes swollen as if he were fighting something he couldn't control. And then something happened. Something Sarah never could have imagined. The judge, a man of power responsible for sentencing so many lives over the years, could no longer contain what was inside him. He stood up from his chair, and with his shoulders slumped, the heavy tears that had been hidden behind his facade fell. He cried. Sarah froze, not knowing what to do. The judge, the man feared by so many, was now before her, vulnerable, broken. He no longer seemed to be the judge who had handed down so many cold, impersonal sentences. He was, at that moment, a desperate man like all the others. I didn't know, Sarah," he spoke in a hoarse voice as the tears fell without stopping. "I never knew." Sarah couldn't understand what he meant, but his words were starting to make sense. Something much bigger was at stake, something no one had ever imagined. The judge, the man everyone thought was impenetrable, was now revealing the truth he had buried for so long. "He is my son." The words were spoken with so much pain, so much hopelessness, that Sarah could hardly believe it. "I never knew, Sarah, but he is my son." The judge, that man of power, was breaking down before her. The entire story had been built on lies and secrets. The true enemy, the one responsible for so much suffering, was there before her. It was him. The judge was deeply involved in the web of manipulation and crimes that had devastated the lives of so many people, including hers. I did what I thought was right. But what I did is unforgivable." He trembled as he spoke, the pain on his face visible with every word. "I pushed my son away from me and I didn't know how to find him. I didn't know what to do." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had lost everything in her pursuit of justice, and now the truth was there in a man who, up until that moment, she had considered an authoritative figure. But before her he was just a man crushed by guilt. The judge looked at her, his swollen eyes as if waiting for some form of forgiveness, but Sarah knew there was nothing that could be done. The scars of everything that had happened were too deep. The pain he had caused and the pain he was feeling now were a direct consequence of his own choices. "I don't know what to expect from you now, Sarah," the judge said, his words heavy with sadness. "But I hope you find some form of peace because mine has been destroyed." With that, silence took over the courtroom. Sarah stood there, not knowing what to do, as if the judge's words were draining all her energy. The truth was finally before her, but none of it made sense. The man she thought was the key to all the answers, the judge, was now revealing that his own story had been built on lies. And in the midst of all the pain and confusion, Sarah realized one thing: the search for the truth had destroyed her. But it was this same truth that would set her free. The courtroom was in absolute silence, as if time itself had slowed down, waiting for the next word. Sarah stood there, motionless, her thoughts a confusing mix of anger, pain, and a terrible sense of emptiness. The judge, now visibly defeated, was before her, crumbling under his own guilt. But there was something more. Something Sarah still didn't fully understand. She looked at him, her eyes fixed on his worn face. The man she had thought was the center of all truth was now broken, with no clear answers. But instead of resentment, Sarah felt a strange compassion for him. Maybe he had done terrible things, but as she herself had learned, no one is free from the shadows of their own past. It was then that the judge, with a trembling voice, dropped the final bombshell that would change everything. "Sarah, you never knew, but I'm not the only one involved in this. I'm not the beginning of this story. I'm just a piece, a manipulated piece." Sarah froze. What did he mean by that? She couldn't comprehend. The man who had acted with coldness and authority was now saying he was being manipulated? The judge raised his hand, pointing to the back of the courtroom where, almost like a shadow, another figure appeared. She was familiar. Sarah recognized the face immediately. It was John Reynolds. "John, you?" Sarah whispered, her throat dry, unable to process what was happening. John, the prosecutor, was standing at the door, his face impassive. But now, something was in his gaze, something Sarah had never seen before: guilt. "You don't understand, Sarah," John said, his voice low, as if preparing to reveal the impossible. "I knew everything. From the beginning. The judge wasn't in control, but I was. And you never knew that." What was he saying? John, the prosecutor who seemed to be her only ally? He was involved in all of this? "Everything you did, Sarah, everything you believed was part of a much bigger game than you imagine. You were being used. We all were used," John continued, now moving to the center of the room. "The true mastermind behind all of this is behind everything. And he knew you would go to the end, even without knowing who the real enemy was." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filling with a mix of fury and disbelief. How could he? She had trusted John. He had been her source of strength, her ally in the midst of pain. But now he was revealing he was part of the problem. "You did this for power, didn't you?" Sarah asked, her anger taking over her words. "You used me, John." John looked at her, his eyes now showing something that seemed to be regret. "I did what I was forced to do," he said, his voice low. "I had no choice. I didn't know you would discover the truth, but I knew that if you did, the price would be too high." What was he saying? What had he done? Sarah felt her head about to explode. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they didn't make sense. Then, John stepped closer to her and placed a piece of paper in her hands. It was a confidential document. "Here's what you need to know, Sarah," he said, and the silence deepened even more. "You weren't looking for an enemy. You were looking for a truth no one ever wanted you to discover." Trembling, Sarah opened the paper. What was written there? What would she see now? When she read it, everything made sense. Everything was clear. The man she loved, the man she was searching for, wasn't who she thought he was. Tyler, the lost son, was John's son. He and the judge were both deeply involved, and the whole story of manipulation, revenge, and pain, it was all connected to them. And even more shockingly, Tyler was alive. But he didn't want to be found. He had withdrawn from everything to protect those he loved. And now, this whole story was a smokescreen to hide an even more bitter truth. The judge, John, and everyone around him were pieces of a game where Tyler was the real missing link. Sarah looked at John, her heart broken by the betrayal. But then one last revelation came to her mind, something she hadn't considered. Had she also been part of the plan? "So, what did you think of that plot twist? I know it was heartbreaking, right? The truth, finally revealed, but still so many mysteries left to uncover. If you were as shocked as I was, don't forget to leave a like down below. It helps the channel grow and bring even more emotional stories like this one to you. Oh, and if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit the bell so you won't miss any new chapter of the stories we share here. We're just starting to explore the deepest secrets, and I'm sure you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for staying with us until now. Your presence makes all the difference. See you in the next chapter, where more secrets will be revealed. We'll see you soon.